Hi, this is Ann Yandian from the Bulge Judicial Institute at Duke Law School, and I'm here with Judge Betsy Chesney, and we're here to discuss her thesis, and I'm going to let Judge Chesney introduce herself.
My name is Betsy Chesney, and I am a United States Magistrate Judge. I am in the Western District of Texas and the San Antonio Division, and a recent graduate of the Duke LLM program.
Betsy, can you tell us what the topic is of your thesis and how you got the idea to write it?
Sure. The official title of my thesis is Identifying and Mitigating Negative Side Effects of Power on Judicial Behavior in the Workplace. And how I got the idea to write about that topic was that at the time that I started the program, it was right in the wake of the Me Too movement being at its apex and getting a lot of coverage in the media. And so my background before becoming a judge is I was an employment lawyer. So I worked with employers in an effort to reduce and address misconduct in the workplace, including sexual harassment. So it was a topic that I had some background knowledge about. And then when Me Too was happening, it was getting a lot of attention from the media in a new and kind of different way, including in the judiciary. The judiciary, like many other institutions, was discovering that it maybe was experiencing this problem at a higher level than they'd realized. And so as all of this was unfolding, I read an article in the Atlantic Monthly about some social science researchers who had demonstrated that the acquisition of power could lead to someone experiencing a decrease in their capacity for empathy and also certain other negative side effects. And so I started to think about, well, that's interesting, because they were talking about it in the context of some of these other high-profile people who'd been accused, politicians and big people in Hollywood and things like that. But I was thinking about it in terms of, wow, well, it has some pretty interesting implications for judges. So that's how I got the idea to kind of get into all that social science research and then think about what it might mean for judges in particular, and then examine, what was the judiciary doing to address this type of workplace misbehavior by some judges. And given what the researchers had uncovered about this relationship between power and some of these issues, were the things that the judiciary was doing, were they likely to work? Were they taking into account the kind of what the science was showing about why some of these things might be happening?
And what was the process of writing like for you? When did you find time to write?
Before I became a lawyer and worked as an employment lawyer for those years, I was actually a writing teacher. So I've thought a lot about the process of writing. When I used to teach students about writing, there was this quote from a book that I used to teach them about how research is like dating and writing is like marriage. And in that, writing requires so much more of a commitment. And that's often a big obstacle to people getting started writing. And so there is this book by Anne Lamott about writing called Bird by Bird. And in that book, the title comes from her discussing how she had a little brother who was struggling with doing a project. And he was supposed to write about, all these different kinds of birds, and he just couldn't get started. And, his dad said to him, just, do it bird by bird. Just, take one bird, do the next bird. And so getting started, I think, is the hardest part. And for me, the way that I got started was we had to do an abstract for one of our classes at Duke that was working on kind of workshopping our theses. And so I, wrote that abstract, and I don't love it the first time you write it. And so then I just keep revising it and revising it. And I kept a stack of my drafts of the abstract as I was sort of doing more research and then thinking more about what my thesis was going to cover. I just kept revising that initial intro section. And as I sort of honed in on what I wanted to really say, then it comes time to actually write the meat of the paper. And when you need to kind of go from just reading all these interesting articles and ideas of other people and work, and actually put it down and say something about it, it just takes work. And so what I would just do is just say, okay, I'm just going to read these 5 articles today, and I'm going to write about them into the paper. And it might not be perfect, but I'm just going to get something down there. And so I do that, and then I come back to it the next day until I've gotten through kind of the bulk of the material, and then revise. The hardest thing, of course, is to, I think, find time to do that in the middle of anyone who's an LLM student in this program is going to be an active judge, have a docket, have pressing issues that are always jumping to the forefront of your attention, perhaps also family issues that you're trying to manage. And so it's hard because writing requires uninterrupted blocks of time. At least for me, I can't just spend 10 minutes and then leave it and then come back and spend 10 minutes and get any meaningful work done. So what I did is I took my calendar and I blocked off chunks of time, 4 hours, usually 4-hour chunks of time. I set up a different room in my chambers. I have a little conference room where I could leave all of my papers and everything spread out. I would go into that room and I told my staff when I blocked off those 4 hours, I wasn't going to schedule any hearings. I wasn't going to schedule any calls. I was going to treat that time as time when I was completely unavailable. I blocked off a few Sundays at home too over the course of time, but mostly I did it during work hours by blocking out sort of various chunks of or windows of time. I did also kind of try to look at a couple months worth of my calendar at the same time and sit down and say, how much will it take me? How many hours do I think it will take me to get a first draft done? How many hours will it take me to get section 2 done and section 3 done? And I wasn't always right. I mean, some things took longer, some things took shorter, but it was helpful to just kind of have a plan so it wasn't too overwhelming to go from nothing to complete.
There's some great tips in there. Do you have a sense of how many hours you spent actually researching and writing, just even in rough numbers?
I would say, I mean, if I'm thinking back to how much time that I blocked off, it probably was 50 to 60 total hours, maybe a little bit more.
Yeah, that's helpful. I think that's helpful. So what was the most interesting or surprising thing you learned working on your thesis?
The most interesting thing that I learned from the research and kind of in doing the work that I was doing was this idea that scientists had documented this connection between acquiring power and having a diminished capacity for empathy. Because there's a way in which the opposite could have been true. It could just be that people who are not particularly empathetic acquire power, like that's part of why they get power. But there was this, the correlation was actually proved in the reverse. And so what that suggested to me is that we as judges, we need to have power. It's a really important part of our job that we're able to make hard decisions that are unpopular sometimes because it's what the law requires. And that's part of the way our government, of course, balances the different branches is through that sort of exercise of judicial power. But if acquiring power can have these impacts of increasing your hubris and decreasing your empathy, it seems really important for judges to acknowledge that, be cognizant of it, take steps to mitigate those negative impacts. And so I just thought that part of the scientific research had these really interesting implications for judges in general, and what kind of how we might want to work on making sure that we're not too affected negatively by those things.
Well, thank you, Judge Chesney. I appreciate your time, and we'll talk again soon.
Thanks, Anne.